Welcome back, everybody, to the PB&J podcast. Today, we are talking about something that happened pretty recently, which was the protest turned
Something.
takeover, assault, something at the Capitol that happened on January 6th. So, we were going to be talking about something else today, but because that happened, we felt, maybe we should address this because there's a lot going on. Um, so we'll just go ahead and take off. And Jordan, are you okay? Sort of just introducing this and getting us started.
Yeah, it was my idea. So I'll just tell you guys, Ben and I were actually going to do a different pod today. We were going to talk about should Christians drink, like the Christian positions on alcohol, which we are prepped for, and it was actually going to be a very fun conversation. And I was really excited to do that. And then Wednesday happened.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a big pie that you have to cut up here. That's a
Mhm.
weird analogy, but it's a lot to piece through.
Yeah.
Let me just say a couple initial things, I guess would be the best place to start. I was really, really, really bothered by what I saw, and I was really hurt. Uh, I think part of it is that I had finally felt after the election that there was a sense of normalcy returning in terms of political discourse. Like, yeah, it's still vitriolic. It's always going to be vitriolic, but the intensity seemed to have died a bit. And I knew that was going to have a rise with the Georgia runoff, but I guess I just had gotten too complacent and comfortable, and I just did not anticipate it becoming what it was. So seeing, how do I say this? I don't even know how to say this because I don't even know what to call these people. Seeing this group of, I'll just call them radicals, rush up for a variety of reasons, some of them claiming enacting biblical prophecy. Yes, you heard it here first. They said that. It's not great. Was disturbing to me at a personal level because uh, I thought 2021 was supposed to be cool, man, and you already ruined it. Like, I was so excited, and then like you
I
just
thought we
done.
already got past the final boss. Come
You,
on.
someone had a really great. Exactly, we just got past the final boss, and there's a second one. It's like the worst video game of all time, or like a song that you don't like that doesn't end. Where it like has like a quiet period. And you're like, oh, thank God, and it's like starts back up.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know what song that would be, but it's 2020, the song of 2020. So someone said we're basically on December 36th of 2020. Another person had a really good, what are they called? TikTok. I'm sorry, I just had a brain fart. A really good TikTok where they said like days without incident, and it had 2021 on there, and it had 6, and then like this person went up, erased it, grabbed a bottle of wine, and drank the whole thing, and the TikTok got off. And it was impressive because it was very funny, and also it's impressive they chugged a bottle of wine. But it was crazy, and I laugh at that, but it was really indicative of kind of like a heartbreak. I I was trying not to get my hopes up, but I did. It just felt clean. I think because like even though the holidays were different for me, I stayed home. I didn't see my family. We did everything on Skype and via mail.
Mhm.
Ironically, literally that night, I got my gifts from my in-laws and we opened them after all that. So it was a really unique day. It was just a weird day. Uh, with all that going on, man, it was disturbing. I think a lot of people were disturbed, and I think one of the net benefits of this is that people on both sides of the aisle for the first time are disturbed. I suppose the enemy of my enemy is my friend, which is not a bad thing, but well, it's not a
Yeah.
good thing either. But it is what it is, and that's not really nuance as much as it's humor. Really, what I'm trying to get at and what I'm trying to say is that I think that we need to have a conversation about this because there's a couple of important consequences that I thought were really, really important that are going to come out. I've seen all the takes on social media. I don't have anything unique to say. I'm not going to tell you something that you may not have been able to hear. I don't know anybody in the evangelical circles talking about this. But that's maybe because of my lack of awareness. So the first thing I want to say is I don't think the proper response is to say God's got this. Yes, that's a proper response to everything, but I don't think that's the tactful response today. Uh, because part of the tie-in for these people with their radical Christians that think they're helping enact some biblical prophecy. That's been some of the things that have been circulating around. There's a lot of people who have a lot of vitriol toward Christians right now on Twitter, and those very other social media sites. And I just wanted to say, I think we need to have this conversation because we're a Christian podcast. We're explicitly religious in that sense, right? We are talking about it from a certain perspective,
Mhm.
and our audience is that group, and hopefully some other people, but mostly Christians. It's really kind of who we're making this for. I think we're going to have some really tough conversations ahead in the next couple months, maybe even the
Mhm.
next couple years. And I think we need to have it some starting conversations about it now because I think that the the opportunity to be apolitical or to pretend it's not a big deal is dying because our culture is becoming more charged.
Mhm.
And so if we don't have some ideas on how to respond up front or a firm grip on really what we even believe, I think it's going to allow us to get swept up. So Ben, I know that was a lot to kind of get through, but that's kind of why I asked us to do this. I know we talked a little bit, but before I go on, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I don't think there's anything to add. I mean, so essentially, what this conversation is more. Yesterday kind of demonstrated we're at a crazy place. The yeah, where it's people taking drastic measures. Some of them are just doing it because they're just taking advantage of an opportunity to be radical. Some of them are like what you mentioned, which I guess is more along the lines of what we'll address, because there's a lot of attitudes that fed into what happened yesterday,
You're not
a
wrong.
lot of perspectives, a lot of political motivations. We're more looking at, we'll look at some of those, but we're more looking at, from the religious perspective and some of the religious motivations for some of what took place and some of the discourse surrounding that. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
See, I'm glad you're here because you always say what I'm saying better. But it's the discourse that I'm really concerned about, like the future conversations. My big concern is the fallout and how we're going to address that. And you're right, there are a lot of attitudes in there. Some are Christian, but there's a guilty party of Christians in there.
Mhm.
So can I just start by kind of talking about what we talked about at the beginning in our prep, really jumping in on like what what I think is going to be difficult for us as Christians.
Mhm.
Okay, so if it is in fact true, and I think the reports seem to indicate that it is so, that there were some Christian radicals here, and there's even some, and I can just tell you that I have a family member who was on social media saying that this is part of God's plan to storm and attack people uh, for unknown reasons and to bring bombs into the building. This is part of his ultimate plan. Maybe that is true. I just think it's a really difficult thing to say. Uh, to me, that seems so obviously violent and sinful. And if we condemn the violence in the summer protests from last year, a year I really don't want to revisit, but seems to hang on to me like, I don't know, like a tick, literally sucking the life out of me. Sorry, I got really dark, guys. But
Hey, I'm sure a lot of other people feel that way too.
yeah, maybe you should turn off this podcast. No, stay in the podcast, please. Give us a subscribe and like.
Yeah,
But
do
no,
that too.
actually, seriously, do though. In all seriousness, though, my big fear is that we're gonna have some fallout as Christians, and that people are gonna point the finger, and we're gonna be one of the guilty parties. And I think that a lot of what's happening is in the last 30 to 40 years, we've had a really, really close tie between evangelicals and conservative parties, and it's becoming a bit more radicalized. That's not to say that every evangelical is conservative or that they're even radical. In
Mhm.
fact, I don't think many of them are, but again, it's the minority, the vocal minority that's the loudest, right? But that's the one who gets the splashy headlines, and that's usually the one who gets the blame on both sides of the aisle, right? Um, it's just kind of how we function as humans, whether right or wrong. So I'm making this to put some perspective, or we're making this to put some perspective back into it, but also because there's going to be some conversations, some finger pointings, and some defenses that we're going to have to probably put up about what's going on. Uh, I had a family member say that this is part of God's plan, that the storming of the Capitol will reveal the truth with all caps. I don't know what that means. I didn't ask, and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, how did I get here? I didn't even post anything on Facebook.
Mhm.
Why did I open this app? Where's that bottle of wine that person chugged? I'm just kidding. But like, I had lots of questions. None of them were what I wanted to ask that day. I really just wanted to find out what's for dinner. Um, but my main point is simply this, that there's going to be some finger pointing. And I think it's really important that we as Christians nail down where we should be, where we ought to be, and what we are and who we are loyal to, but also some of the challenges that we're going to be doing and maybe some of the conversations that we're going to have to find defenses of. First Peter 3:15 says something. It says, "Be prepared to give an answer to all those who ask for you the reason that the hope that you have," which is essentially the apologetics verse. What an apologetic is it's a defense of the Christian faith. Why is it valid? Why is it okay? One of my big concerns is I think culture is moving in such a way where Christianity is not considered an intellectually viable option.
Mhm.
What I mean by that is that it's becoming an uneducated thing. I think that we're over relying as an American culture, particularly in the left, and I do tend to lean that way. But I think it's wrong that we buy into a Marxist worldview where truth is based on conflict, right? Classist conflict. And so we can see through that lens, whether it's, bourgeoisie and proletariat or white versus black or whatever. And I'm not saying that those conflicts don't exist. I just don't think they're the defining reality. They're not the defining trait of reality. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
So don't misrepresent that. But part of that worldview doesn't open up a lot of room for religion. In fact, it treats religion as if it is an opiate. Actually, Karl Marx called it an opiate for the masses, and that
Mhm.
it enables and placates unhealthy thinking to not allow us to move forward in progress. The irony is that the brain studies show that religion helps you think more objectively about issues. You have lower stress levels. Generally, your marriages last longer and you're happier. Now, those I'm sure aren't perfect studies and there's critiques that can be made. I'm not a scientist by any stretch, but we as Christians have to think about what's going to be coming in the pipeline for us. We could be the scapegoat for the extreme right. Oh, we got the prophecy wrong, or maybe we could just be lumped in with them, you know, wrongly. We could have a left movement of extreme leftists that are telling us that because we believe we're enabling something or we're in a harmful religion or we're hurting people, and we've even seen some of that with the interactions with the LGBTQ community or plus community. I'm sorry if I missed a letter there. I really mean that sincerely. I don't. I'm just not good with the acronym. Um, but ultimately, like that community, we've had mixed relationships with,
Mhm.
and I'm merely just saying that there is an upcoming conversation that I think we got to prep for, or conversations. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was a lot of the rise of Christian nationalism. I'm sure a lot of people are tired of the word nationalism because we talked a lot about nationalists. It's not become a good word. Nationalism is the idea of like this country first, this country first. It's very honestly, it's very Nazi in that sense, right? Um,
I mean, um,
Well, it was
yeah.
used in Nazism. That's not to say that so I'm not arguing. I'm not going to tell you that if you think politically, we should put America first over like China, that you're crazy. I I think
But you
the
mean
debate.
it has echoes that stem from the rise of Nazi Germany with the National Socialist Party.
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
go
Uh,
ahead.
and it's the idea, and in some sense, it can be, if not articulated well, or the finer points aren't nuanced out, a little naive about the complex global economy. I work in a field that is pretty well tied. I can't tell you what I do because of licensing reasons, but I work in a field that's fairly well tied with the global economy. And I'm not super knowledgeable, but aware of what's going on. And what I'm saying is that the idea of Christian nationalism can be seen as naive and bad, but ultimately, I think it's fundamentally contradictory to Christianity in and of itself. Jesus is ironically not apolitical or even anything else. He's really just the Son of God, and I think when we try to interpret the texts in different ways, we're kind of missing the point. But he does say something that I think is really powerful. He goes, "Give to Caesar's what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's." In that story. And the idea is that, paying taxes, you submit to where you're at. That's not what this is about, right? Like you serve a different power, or at least that's how I've interpreted the passage historically, right?
Mhm.
Um, so give to Caesar what Caesar requires, give to the governing bodies what they require, but you serve a bigger purpose. I think the Christian nationalists have conflated America with either some biblical prophecy or as a godly nation. And I want to say this, and it's going to be offensive. I think it's really hard to call us a godly nation, and it's been hard to call us a godly nation for a long time. And I also think the concept of a godly nation is a bit of a misnomer and also an oxymoron, uh, because to make an arbitrary distinction of a country and borders being godly is fundamentally backwards, because that was kind of the whole point of Jesus, because redemption was only for the Jews, and that's a nation, a very specific ethnic group that had a specific piece of land that was supposed to be given back to them. Yet when he comes, we have the opening of the temple, like the temple curtain tears down, his spirit enters the world. That the idea is that, now, slave nor Greek, nor Jew or is it Jew nor Greek, slave nor free? I don't remember. Ben, you're the bastard. You can
No,
do
you're
it.
almost there, and then male nor female.
Yeah.
You're right.
Thanks, man. I'm glad I butchered it. But but the whole thing is this, man. Like it's not it's not a particularism. It's an inclusivism in that sense, right? That's probably a really bad butchering of the terms, but it's bigger than that. So nationalism has become a very dangerous thing because it's somehow has gotten in bed with Christianity. We saw early in the 80s. Well, we saw earlier in the 80s, but in the 70s, 80s with televangelists was when that really started. You know, you saw the rhetoric of it when we were fighting the atheist, the atheist Soviet Union in the Cold War, was a big piece of that. And we were like somehow bringing God back in, but also capitalism, like as those two are the same thing. They're not. That's not. I'm not anti-capitalist. I'm just telling you they're not the same thing. And if you think that, it's absurd. It's crazy. And I'm not going to shy away from telling you that it's what book are you reading and how are you reading it? We have an How to Read the Bible podcast series. Listen to that and then come back and have this conversation. That's not insulting. It just, I don't understand. And my whole thing here is not trying to nuance or be creative or get out of something. Is just to say that's wrong. I think we can say that's wrong, because when you do that, you lower you take Jesus and you make him look a lot different than he looks like. And it's strange to me, because how would you respond as an American if you are a nationalist? That's a Christian nationalist, excuse me, particularly a Christian nationalist. When you see a church member in I don't know, Ethiopia or Korea or China or Europe, what about them if they became Christian nationalists? What if they said that this was God's country on their side? Who has the monopoly on God's grace? Well, this is an arbitrary distinction I'm making, which is my whole point, is that you created one first and now we can have that discussion. So I'm not trying to be insulting or mean. And Ben, when we talked about this, I really wanted to talk about this. The rise of Christian nationalism put us in bed with this kind of like America first attitude. That's fine to be America first, but that is a separate thing from your Christian theism, from your Christian faith. They're not at all intertouched. This is not some advocation of separation from church and state. This is saying that if you have to choose between the two, if you're a Christian and you don't choose Jesus, you've now answered the question who you serve, and it is not Jesus. Like, Ben, am I harsh here? Talk me off this ledge.
No, no, you're not being harsh. Christian nationalism is a very interesting thing, and it's developed into a very interesting thing, though I'm not too surprised on where it's gotten. I'm also not too surprised about the rhetoric surrounding not just what happened yesterday, but I think I'm safe in saying um, generally Trumpism, especially the religious motivation behind it. And I'm not saying, if you're a Christian, you can't support Trump, or I'm also not saying if you're a Christian, you must support Trump. I think both of those positions are incredibly flawed.
Yep.
But yeah, but
That's not
it's
moderation. That's common sense. So Ben's not playing some puppet here, guys.
yeah.
It's just how life works.
But historically, it is interesting. Like you have the holiness movement, which started off being very concerned about not just the perfection of holiness in the individual, but the perfection of holiness in society. As a matter of fact, the prohibition was a major point of connection between a lot of believers, especially those in the holiness movement, the American holiness movement, because they saw that as justification that yes, their mission is not just to help people become transformed in their individual lives, but to transform society as a whole, vis-a-vis American as a America as a nation, including its governmental institutes, and making sure that there are laws that are passed that are Christian in nature, that sympathize with Christian beliefs and theology. You also have the same thing with American evangelicalism, which started much earlier, but that also had the same undertones. It was the pursuit of converting, yes, individuals, but also converting an entire nation, including its governmental structures and its laws. And kind of what you get by that is this idea of the notion that in order to be a good American, you must be Christian, or in order to be a good Christian, you must be, how
A
do I
very
put this?
particular type of American.
Yeah, a staunch patriot to the like a blind patriotism. I guess I'll put it like that.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, that's a
blind
good way to say it.
patriotism. So the best way I can articulate why this tension is awkward, or why this relationship is awkward, is I was talking with my parents one time. We were when I was pastoring a church. I think it was our first service, church service. I don't remember if it was on the 4th of July or if it was on Memorial Day or Veterans Day. One of those, where typically the church service is going to be very much a celebration of Americana, right? You sing like American patriotism songs. You share stories about America's role in the world and yada yada yada, and that's fine. But I told my parents, I says, but I cannot, in good conscience, structure a service entirely around a celebration of
A
the
nation.
nation that we're in. I says that feels very uncomfortable to me, and I articulated it this way. I says, what if I went to a place like North Korea, which I know Christianity is outlawed. This is a very obscure example, but still, it holds. Or like South Korea. Let's say I go to a church in
Actually, that
South
makes
Korea.
the argument stronger, to be honest with you, the
Yeah,
North Korea one.
yeah. Okay, so I go to church in North Korea, because I'm sure there are underground churches there, and it happens to be that I'm there during their national, like their celebration of their, I don't know, the birth of the great leader, right? So they're celebrating that. So the entire church service is just focused on celebrating the great leader and the Kim family and all that that nation has done. And I was talking to my parents. I says, "Do you really think I'd feel like I was in a worship service that morning, or was I just in a service that celebrated a country?" And in which case, I was the stranger, very much the outsider, and every element of the service continually told me, uh, this uh, this is a celebration of something that I am not a part of, that I'm the outsider. I says I can't do that. But that tends to be how a lot of churches go, especially in the States. With we have this marriage of we have to support America, with blind patriotism, and we have to celebrate it, and we have to do all that, and we have to try and influence politics as much as we can, because by doing so we can. This is partly getting into our conversation, I think, of Christians and drinking, the history part. Um, oh,
Well,
and I shouldn't have said that, because now I lost my train of thought. Oh, I know, the idea that somehow the church can make sure that the government legislates righteousness,
oh yeah,
which is really the end point of a lot of these conversations of Christian nationalism. These people that stormed the Capitol, who had religious motivation, saying this is God's will, are trying to impose a way of living that's supposed to honor God, which is a very legalistic approach. Is essentially what
say,
it stems from. I'm sorry if there's a tangent that went on, but
no, no, you nailed it. Yes, the Christian position of legislating by following every rule, and that was what makes you holy.
yeah,
Such a Christian position. That was really mean. I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. But
no, it's
when
fine.
you kept talking, I was like legalism, legalism, legalism.
I mean, that's what it is. Like that's a major undercurrent and inevitable conclusion of following, Christian nationalism is that's where you get either a theocracy or a very strict legalistic structure,
What
authoritarian structure.
I feel like the theocracy would have to be a very strict legal structure, a legalist structure for its religious belief, or even some kind of divine impartation. But even then, that'd be very challenging because who's the primary voice of God, the one chosen by God? You know what I mean? It gets into a very scary place. The irony is that a lot of evangelicals are very critical of the Catholic Church because of the same thing about having one person be the spokesperson.
Yeah. Pretty much. Yeah. So he
Anyway,
just yeah,
pot meet
but instead
kettle.
of religious leaders, Protestants just tend to look at politicians and say, we'll just throw all our eggs in that basket.
Yeah. Oh, jeez. Uh, no, you ain't wrong. So, as I hope you can see why we think this is not a good thing. Let's talk about the Christian side of it instead of the history and the nationalism real fast, just real fast, because
Sure.
we need to move on to the next part. But who Christ is, and what Christ has done, I think, is open the idea of grace for others. What I mean by that is that these people that are no, they're not crazy. I'm trying not to say crazy because I'm trying to be graceful. I'm not doing a very good job. The radicals that storm the Capitol are all, in the eyes of God, are no different than myself in the sense that they are just as in need of grace as I am. The radical socialist, Marxist, communist, Lenin, not Leninist because no one's really a Leninist, but like communist, like evil religion person is just as much in need of grace as I am. The regular person looks just like me that just happens to think a little differently than me, but we're all actually all not that different and we can hang out if we wanted to. Also in need of grace. So is someone who doesn't look like me, that may be black or a woman or Asian or of Native American descent, they're indigenous to another country. I don't know. My point is this: that if we believe in the truth claims of the biblical text, it's to say that we're all fallen in the sense that by being human, you participate in that original sin, that you are inherently sinful. There's something evil about us. I think we can watch the events that have happened in the last year and we can see some of the evilness, whether you agreed with the masks or not. If you believed in them, it felt hurtful and harmful to watch others refuse to wear them because they think it was infringing on their rights when it might have put someone at risk. If you didn't believe in them, it felt hurtful for you because you felt like someone was impeding on your rights, which is evil. Now, I am not a scientist, and I think the data is fairly clear from my understanding. But my point is simply this, man: like, these conflicts arise in tension from two rational human beings that approach the problem in different ways.
Mhm.
That's the nature of sin. That's what it's done to us. It's broken those kind of holistic, healthy relationships. Do you understand? Does that make sense? What I'm
Yeah.
saying to you?
Mhm.
And so I'm not saying that conflict is sin. It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that our sinful nature is a cause of some of the unhealthy and unproductive conflicts we have, and conflict can be redeemed and helped out, or helpful, excuse me, but inevitably it results from our own natures and our own selfishness and typically something inside of us. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
A response to fear, fear of being hurt or fear of, something else happening, or self-righteousness, even, pride, or even being afraid of told what to do. It doesn't matter. It's still sinful because the attitude that got you there is broken. That's not me trying to play the middle ground. It's me trying to tell you that I think that everybody's in need of grace. I'm an evangelical Christian because I believe that.
Mhm.
I believe that everybody ought to get to know Jesus. Do I think everybody will? No. Wide is the path to destruction. Narrow is the gate to heaven. It sucks. I don't like it, but it's real.
Mhm.
It's real. And I want us to say the Christian part of this is not is in direct conflict to some of this nationalist things. And I don't want us to just only talk about that. I want us to talk about what is true, not
Mhm.
just what is wrong. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, this last year has shown, and yesterday was sort of a tipping point in a lot of ways of just a total breakdown in discourse, like the
Yeah.
inability to even have a conversation. And so, in that regard, I want to say it seems like the tendency has been to totally dismiss the protest that this event initially started off as, and just dismiss everything out of hand, just because it ended up becoming something, you know, much greater and more destructive than just a protest. But the protest itself, I think, had some merit, um, certainly, which is the same merit that I would give a lot of the other protests that we saw throughout this last year, which is people who were basically articulating the frustration that they don't feel like they're being listened to and heard, um, which has been which I think are very legitimate things because we've definitely seen that over the last year. People who are, being vilified and, dismissed out of hand, maybe not taken seriously. And that's been a frustration for a lot of people. And you're right, we have been very poor in navigating those conversations and being able to listen. And just because you disagree with someone doesn't mean that um, that their ideas are totally unreasonable or bad or even wrong. They might just be different. So, which is something that we've actually tried to emulate on this podcast, is being able to listen and being able to talk even if we, come to different conclusions. So, I just wanted to emphasize that point that you brought up because it was a good one.
Thanks, man. Yeah, and I also want to make clear, if you don't agree with Ben, that there is an equivalency on the protest. What we're advocating for is not the merit of the protest and the cause behind it. We're talking about the conflict that arises in the destruction and the violence, and how that
Yeah.
is inherently wrong,
Mm.
regardless of the cause. Now, is it understandable? Yes. That's not what no one's that's what Ben's articulating, but we're saying that violence and hurt and pain and suffering and death and bleeding and hurt, like that's not good things. Nobody asked for that. Like, that's not a positive thing.
Yeah.
That's really what we're getting at, and that's the nature of sin, that it's pervasive and it drives us to do these destructive things, self-destructive or destructive of others, in order to whatever, to satisfy that nature inside of you. So that's really all I was getting at. So Ben, I think you said it super well. I just wanted to make sure that I'm being clear on my side. With that said, we really wanted to talk about how it's bad that those two things get in bed. I wanted to talk about, I should be honest, I'm the one driving this conversation. I asked Ben to do this. Poor Ben's along for the ride, so buckle up. Um,
That's
so
okay.
Christianity and nationalism, not good bedmates, should not even live together. Probably should go their separate ways. I hope so anyway. I think it's good. Part of the nationalism with the prophecy, part of the reason that came up, or part of the nationalism Christianity combination, is because of the rise of prophecy. I mentioned the televangelists. Really, a lot of it is the rise of dispensationalism and the idea that we can predict how the end is going to look based on interpretations of Revelation. Now, in our How to Study the Bible podcast, the series that we did, we kind of talked about how this is not an accurate view of Revelation, or even really what the book is getting at in general. Uh, it's been normalized in American culture and probably global culture too. And I am going to be probably a little mean here. So, Ben, check me, please. I need you to do that. The Left Behind series, I think, did a lot of harm for a lot of people my age and a lot of people a generation before me, and maybe even a generation before that, because they became a very popular normalization of dispensational theology, of this idea that when he returns, you're going to get sucked up into heaven and we're going to leave and evacuate this place and it's all going to go to heck in a handbasket and you don't want to be left behind. And it's part of, like, enacting God's justice. And along with that, you normalize the idea that it doesn't matter what happens here now, which is very contradictory to the way Jesus preaches the kingdom of heaven, or at least the way I interpret Jesus preaching the kingdom of heaven, you know? And I mean that, and like that we serve the community and that we are not here to be escapists. Sorry, I wanted to say that. Sorry, Ben.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I was just gonna say, no, you're right, and I don't think you're going too far with that,
Okay.
with dispensational theology, which in a very strange way made America the center of history, which is just bizarre to me, but it did.
I and
So, which is
I
another thing, and yeah.
Yes. No, no, no. Yes. And like, I don't even know how to find and research when that started happening. It just became this thing. And a
Mhm.
lot of it I thought had to do with the televangelist. And I really think they were just trying to do it for money at first. They were getting these like people that are laying at home, like these elderly people staying at home, and like convincing them that, they could predict the future and you should just give them money call this number and give me money. And I will continue to preach the sermon and tell you who the evil Satan person is coming back to. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like, is that what happened? But it happened, and we allowed it to be okay to talk about prophecy, even though it's very clear in the Gospels and like that no man knows the date. No man knows the date. So we play these guessing games, and these people make these elaborate predictions. I had a family member send me a book, and they also sent me multiple Facebook posts talking about a verse in Revelation that said trumpet, and how that led to God being enacted through Donald Trump. And I didn't respond, and I'm looking at those things, and I'm just, how do I as a Christian who's got a degree in religion, who at one point was able to read Koine Greek, like actually read it, who understood the history of the text, who helped design a Sunday school class around it that became a book that I copyrighted, who've actually been here. Well, you copyright, you did all the work, I was just there. But my point remains the same. Like I did all those things and I have a deep understanding, and I want to have this conversation, but this person is so entrenched to the point where I don't even know where to begin to help them, because their worldview is so fundamentally different with mine. Where is my common ground except for the idea of Jesus? Because the person of Jesus that you're talking about is very different than the person that I know. So how do I talk to you about that? And it broke my heart that we've gotten to that point. And I'm not trying to point a finger and blame, but I'm trying to tell you that if you're in that camp where you think that prophecy can be predicted, or that you think that that's an okay thing, I warn you that this could lead to something bad, because it just did. We just saw it do that.
Mm.
And I think we're going to get a lot of backlash as Christians for that. And I think
Yeah.
we need to be prepared for that. And we don't have a defense against it because we let it happen.
Mm.
I'm sorry. That was me being sad.
No, that's fine. Although I guess I might push back just a little bit in what you said,
Please.
that Christians might get push kickback from this, because I feel like we already do with everything else. So people, if people want to blame the church for something, there's a lot of things they could find to do so, and whether it's legitimate or not doesn't matter.
Yeah,
But but
that's
but
fair.
it's true. But when you have people out there articulating, when scroll through Facebook and you have people who are um, sort of provoking and pushing this idea that um, we're trying to invoke God's will, is yeah, is yeah, that's not helpful.
I feel like
It's
you ran
just
out of
not
words
helpful.
there.
I am.
Well, it's dangerous, man. Like, you know, I told Ben in the prep, I was like, we're the representatives of Christ on earth, right? It's the idea of a resident alien, right? Like we're the people that are the hands and feet of this person. We're interacting with this world in such a way that we reveal who he is by virtue of who we are and what we do and how we live. You know what I mean? Like these are legitimate things. And so like, when we saw that stuff yesterday and I started seeing this stuff going on online, that's when I told Ben, I just texted him out of the blue and I was like, dude, we got to do a podcast tomorrow. So we can't.
Mm,
And I guess my fear is this, you're right. Christians do get some blame on stuff. For the most part, we've probably been okay in the US for a while. I don't know if it's going to stay that way. I don't know if it's a bad thing that it doesn't stay that way, because it might wake some of us up. That sounds bad, but I do think the
mm.
church does grow in an uncomfortable position. Actually, we know the church grows in uncomfortable positions. I told Ben in the prep, it's not my preferred way to worship under threat persecution, but I serve the King of Kings. So regardless of what happens, I serve the King of Kings, and I'm just going to double down on that, because what else
Yeah.
can I double down on? What else can I double down on? And I mean that. And so we were kind of discussing this yesterday, and I saw some of the people being mad at the evangelicals, and you enabled this, you let this happen, how could you believe this, how could you be so far divorced from reality? And for the first time in a long time, I didn't just put my phone down and take a step away, not because I'm like that guy that lives on the internet too much. I'm usually fairly good. I do this thing, my wife and I do this thing at night where we watch TV and take our separate time, or we read a book and take our time away from like not having like news fed at us or negative fed at us. And
Mm.
I do this. My wife puts hers somewhere else, but I will take my phone, I will throw it on the couch opposite of me wherever I'm sitting. It's a very fun game because I get to work on like my coordination. It's stupid, but it is. And so I'd have to get up and go all the way across the room to get it. And then what usually happens is I usually throw it on a couch so there's a pillow or a blanket, and my dog will go lay on it. So then it makes it really hard to get. And you're like, okay, that's dumb. Why'd you share that story? Because my point is I separate myself from that, but I didn't turn this off because I had to know for the first time, what is it that they're going to say about the people that I love? And I had this thought because I was so angry. I'm still a little mad about it. I'm not as mad as I was because I've had some time to kind of heal a little bit, but I was so angry. And I was like, I just wish that, and I wished all these evil, hurtful things on these people. And then I stopped myself after doing something horrible and thinking all these horrible things. So This is not a moral victory or some moral high ground. Do not take this as righteousness. This is an example of fallenness, and also an example of a challenge that I'm wrestling with that I hope you do too. I said to myself when I took the Morgan, I was like, the hardest thing that I'm going to have to do in 2021 is forgive the people that I think have hurt our religion, because they are in just as much in need of grace as I am, and I am not the person that disseminates their salvation. I cannot make a false equivalency or justification that you're not part of the church. You don't know Jesus. I can't say that. Like, what grounds do I have to say that? Who am I to impart divine judgment on somebody because you upset me with your actions?
Mhm.
And so then I started thinking about that at a broader scale, about what it means to be a Christian in our political discourse and what it means to bring about God's justice. So Ben, jump in anytime, man.
Okay.
What I thought was this. And we spent a lot of time in 2020 being hurt, being angry, being mad at each other, going after each other, and it was an emotionally taxing year.
Yeah.
I had a pastor at my church say this, and I thought it was incredibly insightful. They say 2020 is going to have a lot of scars, and they said like it's all going to be below the surface scars, whether it was distancing and losing some of those social skills that you had, or in my case, growing really long hair and feeling like you haven't left your house in months because you really haven't. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just telling you how it is, like literally I've only left my house like 4 times. It is what I work here now. Those kind of things, like they have an impact, whether it's just the anger and vitriol of like the political discourse, or even the harm of watching our neighbors kind of get mad at each other, our family get mad at each other. Come on, we all had Thanksgiving in one way or another, and we were either really glad that we could get together or really, really hurt that someone wouldn't come or that we couldn't meet with other people. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Same with Christmas, same with whatever. And my whole point is simply this, that it was a taxing and emotionally driving year, and we have got a lot of anger, and we've been pushed really far apart on one side or the other on a political spectrum. And the hardest things that we have to do is those of us that follow Jesus on one side, left, or the other on the other side, the right. The hardest thing that you're going to have to do is forgive and love that radical person on the other side of the aisle that believes in the person that you believe in, and talks about them in a way that you don't.
Mhm.
I know that sounds crazy and stupid, but I think it's super true. And I think it was the message I needed to hear. And I asked Ben to do this because I think it was the message I needed to say, maybe for myself. So maybe I'm just doing this for me, but maybe you're hearing it and it's speaking to you. I wished so much ill and pain, and at one point, even death, I'll say it, upon the people yesterday that did that.
Mhm.
It disturbed me in a way that I've not been disturbed in a very, like, honestly, since I was a kid and I saw the planes crash in 9/11, and I didn't know how to process that information. I just did. Like that was the most disturbed I've been watching an event in history, even more than the Black Lives Matter, because like that one felt a little different than this one, probably because the group in question wasn't someone I associated myself with, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Um, no, that's not the right word, but because I'm a Christian and I was the people that they were saying were causing this were saying that they believed in the same person that I have put a lot of stake of my life in, and it really hurt me. And I have to forgive those people. But this is, I think, what Jesus means when he says, "Take up your cross and follow me." Like, I have to die a little bit to myself here, in my petty pride, my political opinions, my anger and frustration and self righteousness, that I am somehow better than these people because I didn't go storm a Capitol. I just didn't do something stupid. That doesn't mean I'm any way better than them.
Mhm.
I don't know, Ben. That's where I'm at. And that's why I wanted to have this podcast, because I wanted to say that point. So when we're talking about God and his justice, he can dole out justice fairly. I can't. So I
Mhm.
will rest in his grace because that's all that I can do. And that's all that I ought to be able to do.
Mhm.
Sorry, I will step off my soapbox.
No, you're fine. I mean, even the disciples had, you had Peter, who was a zealot. You had Matthew, who was a tax collector, which the equivalent today would be a
Nope, still tax collector.
diehard, you know, Trump or die person versus an Antifa member,
Sure.
essentially. I mean, they're really not that much different. I mean, look at what happened when someone came to arrest Jesus. Peter took out a sword and cut the guy's ear off. That's pretty extreme. Um,
That's a solid counterpoint, actually. That is pretty extreme.
so yeah, it's not as if, you know, tension cannot exist whatsoever within the body of Christ. So Jordan, I really appreciate, you know, you drawing that point
Sorry.
out that, you know, we do have to forgive these people because yeah, and it's, you know, emotions are going to come up and, you know, you're going to get upset by things, and that's totally fine. Like there's nothing wrong with being upset by something. But what matters is what you do with that and, you know, the direction you go. Like, are you just going to fester in that and just let it continue to feed into, you know, your, I don't know, a rise of emotion and an escalation of tension to the point that it just boils over and we have what happened yesterday? Or are you just going to acknowledge that, you know, this is a person too with their own ideas and their own positions, but we serve a higher purpose that goes beyond our differences. Um,
And
which
everything you do and
sometimes
say
those
represents that person, for the record. Sorry.
yeah, that's fine. And sometimes those differences are difficult to reconcile.
God, yeah.
They can be very difficult to reconcile, but that's a part of the process. Um, if relationships were easy, I don't think they'd be worth it. So that's just my 2 cents. I'll
No,
throw out
no. No, you're
there. Yeah.
good. Ben, in our prep, you had a quote, and I think it's actually a good time to transition to it. If you're okay doing it, I didn't mean to put you on the spot,
Yeah,
but
sure.
we, as we're kind of finishing up here, we talked about, forgiveness, but, let's get back to the broader society as a whole real quick.
Sure.
Um, Ben, you said something that was really that when you first said it, I got a little bit of like fear across my spine.
I could tell, and it made me think I don't think I articulated that very well.
No. It was just in the prep. It was just in the prep. You're good, dude. You're good. But when I thought about it, I actually thought you were right, or at least you touched on a piece of truth that I think is important to bring up. But the whole thing that I think Ben wants to read here is just talking about, there's a Nietzsche quote. I'll just use Nietzsche because I think he's a great example. I hate Nietzsche, but it's
Mm,
not Nietzsche, for the record. If you say Friedrich Nietzsche, we can't be friends. It's Nietzsche. Sorry, I just had to get that out too because that's also a nice PSA. Anyway, the main point about Nietzsche is that he has this really interesting quote that when you stare into the abyss stares back into you. And this idea is that you kind of become the thing that you like hate
hmm.
and focus on the most. And if you hate the radicals and the angers, you become more radicalized because you're driven to believe that this person is something else. Um, I don't know how fair that wisdom is. I have it. Nietzsche lived an interesting life, and he's an interesting guy. He's got really weird opinions, none of which I agree with in any remote way. So it's a little hard for me to take him super seriously when it comes to life advice. But my point is simply this: that I think he touched on something there. So you kind of talked about this film that came out in 2019, right? It was 2019.
Uh, yes.
Yeah, 2020 was 20 years, so I just don't know how long ago that was. But I'll let you read it and explain it. I thought it touched on something that we talked about that I think should be said again.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm just looking up when it came out. Yes, it was 2019.
It's like the fall, right?
Yeah. Also, when you mentioned that quote, "When you stare long enough into the abyss stares back," like you become the thing you hate. I immediately thought of the movie or the musical. I'm sorry, Sweeney Todd, The
Never
Demon
seen it.
Barber on Fleet Street. If anyone has seen it, I love that film because to me that's a good There's a lot of themes in there, but it's a good articulation of the main motivation of the protagonist is hatred of another individual, and by the end of the film he actually becomes the thing that he hates, and he does the thing he that really fed his motivation of hatred towards the other person. So it's just fascinating to me. Anyways, I was scrolling through Facebook last night, and maybe it was earlier today, and someone had seen the Joker film from 2019. You don't have to watch that movie. It was pretty. It was a lot of mixed reactions. A lot of critics didn't like it, and there's a theme that goes on throughout the film, which is like, you know, you get what you deserve, which actually the character of the Joker says that at the end, sort of the climax of the film. He's on a talk show and he I mean, spoilers, but you probably have already at least seen clips of it or heard of it if you haven't already
That movie
seen it.
was actually a harbinger of what was going to happen, and it was a little scary how
Yeah.
accurate it was.
Yeah. But anyway,
And
so this person who saw it, he said this about the film. He says what the film is really doing is it's holding up a mirror to society and saying, "This is you. Like you are a nihilistic people. You've got no morals, and if you have got what you think of as morals, you've really got no reason for holding them. You don't have any grounding for it. And guess what? This is who you are, and this is where you're going." Speaking of the film, because in the film, society completely breaks down, and the character just becomes this, murdering lunatic. Um, anyway, so going back to the quote, one of the recurring lines in the script is, "This is what you deserve." And so essentially, we're getting what we ask for as a society. And then he quotes G.K. Chesterton, who says, "Never take down a fence unless you know what it's there for." We've spent the last however many years taking down as many fences in different areas, and this is now the society that we've created. Um, and in the pre-show, Jordan and I were talking about this, and I articulated this idea very poorly at the beginning, but thanks to Jordan, I was able to clarify it a little bit because he pushed back on my ideas, which was good. And essentially, what this quote's saying, and what I was thinking about in processing what happened last night was, I was a bit surprised by how much negative response there was to what happened and how much surprise there was to what happened last night, given the entire breakdown of discourse and the escalation of attitudes and aggression, like over the last year and certainly beyond, but the last year in particular. So to me and to a lot of other people, sort of seeing what happened yesterday, it was like, yeah, but this is the atmosphere we've cultivated. Like, who's really surprised that this happened yesterday when we've just been feeding into so much hatred and disdain for one another? Of course something like this is going to happen. Like, you're going to have something. I'm not justifying it, I'm not saying it's good, um, but this is an opportunity for us to look at that and say, like, we as a society are responsible for what happened because we as individuals and as groups, we just keep feeding into this type of escalating aggressive discourse. So that was that.
no, it's really good, and that's why I wanted you to bring it up, Ben, because I wanted to tie that into our last point about God and justice, and really about how since He is the one who enacts justice, and we're the one who receive grace, how we communicate that grace. And that's why I thought this analogy was really good when you brought it up in the pre-show, and when we were prepping, I saw the value of it significantly more. This is a creation of what we saw was a creation of radicalism being normalized.
Mm.
I wanted to blame the opposing side for my own personal political spot the whole time. That was my temptation, and it wasn't. And even some of my opinions have become more radicalized and pushed further direction that I tend to lean. And then I kept thinking about it as we were talking about it and prepping, and the language I use, the frustrations, the anger. So let's give some concrete examples, some shout downs, cancel culture on the far right side, overemphasizing of pretty offensive things, you know what I mean? Saying some words with hard R's that you shouldn't be saying, that aren't very nice, or even, calling somebody that is homosexual a certain name that is not good either. Or even if it's something less, intense or less obviously hurtful like that, like not acknowledging, a person's experience because they look a little different than you or something like that. I'm just trying to get to the point is that all that stuff, when we talk about it in radical terms, that was that Marxist stuff I was critiquing earlier, does exactly what Ben you just described in that quote. And that we as Christians have to be and should be, and I think need to be above that and not part of that. The way we communicate the message of hope, even if it has to be on political terms,
Mm.
as Christians, should sound different. And we should, when we see our mirror, not see the same thing that this film was indicating, simply because that's not who we are as a Christian people. And I think that's not who we have to be. But currently, what we're seeing is that society is what it's asking for. And Ben, maybe I'm misinterpreting the quote, but that's how I was thinking about it. What I'm saying is that there is hope, and that hope is found in Jesus Christ, and there is a way out of this. And that's all I'm getting at. Does that make sense, man?
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
That was a deep sigh.
Yeah. No, I'm just processing it. Um, hmm.
I feel like I either made you disagree really strongly or you really don't know what I said.
No, I don't disagree. Um, I'm just trying to I don't know how to articulate it differently than how you did, so I'll just
Okay. I'm glad
go
we
for it.
agree. I don't know.
Well, I mean, like, yeah, like we're not off a cliff. Like, it's not like, we've reached a point of no return. Like, that's never the case. Anyone who says so is really, you know, sort of defeatist. But yeah, you're right. Like, the way forward is not to continue escalating things and just trying to win one side or the other over the other. The way forward is more like a way through, um, and that's just trying to. I mean, it's the same thing. Living as Christ, essentially. Like
Yeah.
it's nothing new. It's not some new formula.
I
It's
know.
just
Like, and that's what I said at the beginning of the podcast. Nothing that we're saying is original or smart. Like, we're not, like, I'm not giving you some nuanced take. I'm not doing what every podcast person does where they're like, okay, so we want to talk about this issue, and I just don't think that we just need to have the conversation. It's important to have the conversation. I mean, we did a little bit of that, but like, you know what I mean? Like, we need to have the conversation. I think it's good to have the conversation for you guys to hear it. And I just don't think anybody's really approaching the issue this way. Yeah, like, we're not doing that. We're just telling you, like, hey, this is what's always been true. It's never not going to be true. And if you believe this, live like it.
mhm. Yeah, just this is how it's true in this context.
Yes. Thank you, Ben.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, I'm glad that we could laugh a little bit on a pretty tough subject. Thank you, Ben, for your flexibility, man, and letting me commandeer the podcast, honestly,
Yeah, no
uh,
problem.
and force us to talk about something rather than drinking. We will do our drinking episode. We'll do it sober. That was a joke. Uh, well, we will actually do it sober. Um, but I'm just. Do you mind if I just sign off and just tell everybody I'm just really grateful that they stuck around this long? And
Yeah,
that, yeah,
no,
I'm
I
not
don't
trying
want you
to.
to say that. You're not allowed to say that. I'm just
No, I
kidding. Yeah,
can't.
yeah,
No,
go ahead.
I hate all of you. Don't ever listen to me again. I'm just kidding. Please don't. Please listen to me. I really need it. No, I'm just kidding. What I wanted to say was, in 2021, one of my goals for myself is to really be more open to being the kind of Christian person I want to be. Like, I want to be more communicative of my faith. I want to be more vocal, not in like a loud and proud way,
Street preacher.
way like a what?
A street preacher.
Yeah, I really don't want to do that. I mean, I'm sure that works for some people. That's just not my cup of tea. Although my hair is long enough to, I could get, if I let my beard keep going, I might be able to pull it off. Who knows?
Yeah,
Um, I actually have a hole in my shirt too on the sleeve, so like, I'm like really close.
you're getting
Uh,
there.
yeah, dude, I got the traits. Maybe I will be a street preacher. Who knows? We'll see what 2021 does to me. 2020 was rough, but what I wanted to say was that I've been praying for the podcast. I don't know if we'll ever reach 1 million viewer listeners, and those of you who are sticking with us now, I just want to say thank you for supporting us. You're being prayed for. I don't know your name. I don't know who you are, but I'm grateful to you, and I want to encourage you. And I really think that you're doing an important thing for me. You're helping me work out my own faith. You're helping me grow and keep me accountable by continuing to study to be sharp for this podcast. And I just wanted to thank you for your support. I really appreciate it. I ask you to like and subscribe because I want you to keep coming back because it's been a beneficial gift to me, and I hope I can give some back to you of what you're giving to me. And I hope that God can speak through me. He can speak through a donkey, so I'm thinking he could probably pull it off, but I don't know. It's pretty close between me and the donkey. To just say thank you, that we're glad that you're listening, and we're glad you stuck with us through 2020, and we hope you stay with us through 2021. So I know, Ben, I don't normally do that, but I wanted to I got some things I had to say.
No, it's all good, man. I mean, so you wrapped it up pretty well. So, well, with that said, be sure to
Yes, sir.
like this if you liked it. Comment if you have something you want to say, or if there's something you want us to talk about, then go ahead and leave a comment or reach out to us, and we'll see you next time.